You'll eat what the dog doesn't finish. Those 7 words changed everything. Not just dinner, not just that night, everything. I'm Eleanor Whitfield, 77 years old, and I've spent my entire life being reasonable. 35 years as a high school principal, teaching kids respect and boundaries. A devoted mother who sacrificed everything for her family. A grandmother who never said no to a request for help. But sometimes reasonable people reach unreasonable limits. The woman who spoke those words was Sabrina Hart, my daughter-in-law, 49 years old, immaculately dressed in designer clothes I helped pay for, sitting in a house I helped buy, eating food I helped fund. She said it with a smile that could frost windows in July. Before we go deeper into what happened next, comment below where you're watching from. My son Marcus froze, his wine glass suspended halfway to his mouth like time had stopped. His face went pale, and I could see the exact moment he realized his mother wasn't going to laugh this off like all the other times. Buddy, their French bulldog, lifted his head from his plush bed in the corner. Even the dog sensed something was wrong. But I wasn't shocked. Not anymore. This wasn't the first cruel comment, just the clearest one. It was the culmination of 4 years of watching my generosity transform into expectation, my love twisted into obligation, my presence treated like an inconvenience they had to tolerate in exchange for my wallet. I set down my fork with deliberate calm. The small clink against the china plate seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. Leela, my 19-year-old granddaughter, watched me with wide eyes from across the table. She was the only one who seemed to understand that something fundamental was shifting. Without a word, I reached across the table and picked up the untouched half of Sabrina's perfectly prepared filet mignon. The steak was still pink in the middle, exactly how she liked it, exactly how I had taught the chef to prepare during my years of funding their lifestyle. I walked to Buddy's bowl in the corner, my footsteps the only sound in the room. The dog's tail wagged uncertainly as I placed the expensive cut of meat in his bowl. He looked up at me with grateful brown eyes, then dove in with enthusiastic chomping. I returned to my seat and picked up my napkin, smoothing it across my lap with practiced grace. "Good," I said, my voice steady as a mountain lake. "Now we'll both find out what he leaves me." The silence that followed was deafening. Sabrina's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Marcus looked like he had been slapped. 2 cousins who had come for dinner suddenly found their plates fascinating. Only Leela moved, nudging my ankle gently under the table. When I glanced at her, I caught the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The rest of the meal passed in awkward silence, punctuated only by the sounds of clinking silverware and Buddy's satisfied eating. Every bite I took felt like a small victory. Every glance between Marcus and Sabrina felt like confirmation of what I already knew. This had been building for years. That night, I drove the 20 minutes from Belmead back to my modest cottage in Franklin, Tennessee. The contrast was stark. From their grand colonial with its perfectly manicured lawn and circular driveway, to my simple 2-bedroom home with the small maple tree I planted after my husband died. But driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. I made coffee with hands that no longer trembled with suppressed anger. I sat at my kitchen table and stared out at that little maple tree, its branches swaying gently in the Tennessee breeze. And I finally allowed myself to think about the numbers. The blue folder had been sitting in my desk drawer for months. Family assistance. I had labeled it in my neat principal's handwriting. I pulled it out now and spread the contents across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. $30,000 for Marcus's temporary car loan. $16,000 for Sabrina's event planning certificate course, $8,000 for summer camps, $12,000 for appliances when they renovated their kitchen, $7,000 for a vacation emergency when they got stranded in Cabo and needed flights home. But it wasn't just the money, it was the pattern. The down payment I'd fronted on their first house, $68,000, that was supposed to be paid back as soon as the market improved. That was 6 years ago. The market had improved. My bank account hadn't. The mornings I'd spent cooking breakfast for Leela and her younger brother Jake so Marcus and Sabrina could attend networking events. The holidays I'd funded but wasn't invited to because Sabrina's family needed intimate gatherings. The times I'd been asked to babysit with an hour's notice, then criticized for not having the right snacks or letting the kids stay up too late. I had become the family ATM with feelings that occasionally got hurt. Looking at those numbers, I realized I'd given them more than some people make in 3 years. And what did I have to show for it? A daughter-in-law who thought I should eat dog scraps, and a son who had forgotten how to call unless he needed something. The coffee grew cold as I sat there calculating. Not just the money, but the cost to my self-respect, the price of being taken for granted, the interest accumulating on years of unappreciated sacrifice. At 77 years old, I had finally reached my limit. The next morning, I woke up before dawn with a clarity that felt like stepping out of fog into sunlight. I showered, dressed in my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to address the school board when they tried to cut the music program, and drove to the bank on West End Avenue. Keisha Monroe had been my personal banker for 3 years. She was a woman in her mid-40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of myself at that age. When I explained what I wanted to do, she didn't even blink. "I want every automatic transfer to Marcus's account canceled," I said, sliding the paperwork across her desk. "And I want his joint access to my savings account revoked today." Keisha reviewed the documents with professional efficiency. "We can absolutely do that, Mrs. Whitfield. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I want to set up a trust account for my granddaughter, Leela Whitfield. I'll serve as trustee until she turns 25. We worked through the paperwork methodically. Every automatic payment stopped, every joint account access revoked, every financial umbilical cord severed with surgical precision. When we finished, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying invisible weights and had finally been allowed to set them down. My phone buzzed as I walked to my car. "Marcus." "Mom, the bank says our transfers are blocked. There must be a mistake. Call me ASAP." I turned off the phone and drove to see Harold Pierce. Harold had been my attorney for 15 years, handling everything from my husband's estate to the legal work when I'd helped Marcus and Sabrina buy their house. He was 58, methodical, and had the rare quality of listening more than he spoke. "I want my will amended," I told him, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Leela inherits the bulk of my estate through a living trust. I want Dorothy Klein as successor trustee." He made notes with his expensive pen. Dorothy, to everyone who knew her, was my oldest friend, 78 years old, retired ER nurse, and the most trustworthy person I knew. If something happened to me, she'd make sure Leela was protected. "Anything else?" Harold asked. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the card I'd been keeping in my back pocket for 6 years. "When I gave Marcus and Sabrina that down payment for their house, you filed a security deed, giving me a 12% interest in the property. per your advice at the time." Harold's eyebrows lifted slightly. He remembered. "I want to enforce it. They can refinance me out in 60 days, or they can begin making payments according to the original agreement. If they choose neither option, the deed allows me to compel a sale." The silence in Harold's office stretched like a held breath. Outside, Nashville traffic hummed with its usual urgency, but in here, time seemed suspended. "You kept all the documentation?" he asked. "I kept everything," I said. By the time I got home that afternoon, my phone showed 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails. I deleted them all without listening. Instead, I made myself a proper lunch, chicken salad on fresh bread with sweet tea, and ate it in my garden. The September air carried the first hint of autumn, and my chrysanthemums were just starting to bloom. I was finishing my tea when Sabrina's black SUV pulled into my driveway. She didn't get out immediately. I watched her through my kitchen window as she sat in the driver's seat, probably practicing whatever speech she'd prepared. Her sunglasses were pushed up on her head, and even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders. When she finally emerged, she moved with the calculated grace of someone accustomed to getting her way through charm and manipulation. Her smile was already in place before she reached my front door. "Eleanor?" she called through my screen door, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "There's been some kind of misunderstanding." I opened the door but didn't invite her in. No misunderstanding, Sabrina, just clarity. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide the strain around her eyes. "Look, I know you're upset about last night. Maybe I was a little sharp, but you know how stressful things have been." "This isn't about last night," I interrupted. "This is about the last 4 years. Your mortgage payments, your car payments, your dinners out, your vacation emergencies, they're all yours now." The mask slipped. Just for a second, I saw the flash of panic before she regained control. "Marcus is under a lot of pressure at work," she said, her voice taking on a pleading edge. "This isn't the time to make drastic changes." "Then Marcus can learn to adjust his budget, like the rest of us did when we were his age." She stood there for another moment, probably calculating her next move. When she realized I wasn't going to budge, she turned and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her drive away, then went inside and made myself another cup of tea. The afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen windows, turning everything golden. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The next day, Marcus showed up at my door. He knocked hard enough to rattle the glass, then let himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago, a key I made a mental note to retrieve. He stood in my living room scanning the space as if my newfound backbone should have somehow redecorated the house. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his tie crooked, his hair uncombed. "Mom, canceling everything over a joke?" I set down my coffee and looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in months. When had he gotten so soft around the middle? When had those lines formed around his eyes? When had he started looking at me like I was an obstacle to his happiness instead of the woman who'd given him life? "But you taught me that family helps family," he said, and I heard the petulant tone of the teenager he'd once been. "I did teach you that," I agreed. "But I also taught you the difference between helping and enabling, between family support and financial dependence." Apparently, one of those lessons didn't stick. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he'd been caught in some mischief. "We can't just suddenly handle all these payments on our own. The mortgage alone is your responsibility," I finished, "as it should have been 6 years ago." "But we've built our whole budget around my money." Yes, I know. That was the problem.
He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. This was the woman who had never said no to him, who would build him out of every financial scrape, who had subsidized his lifestyle without complaint. But here's what most people don't understand about boundaries. They're not cruel. They're necessary. And they're not punishments. They're corrections. Marcus left that day frustrated and angry. I remained calm and resolved. The gossip network activated within hours. Aunt Margot called from Knoxville, her voice tight with concern. "Eleanor, honey, what's this I hear about you cutting off Marcus?" "I'm teaching him independence." "At his age?" "Apparently, it's never too late to learn." Bianca, Sabrina's sister from East Nashville, gave me the cold shoulder at Kroger. My neighbor Gus mentioned trouble in paradise when I saw him at the hardware store in Brentwood. The whispers followed me through the community center where I volunteered, through the library where I shelved books, through the post office where I collected my mail. But something remarkable happened as the gossip swirled. I didn't care.
For the first time in years, people's opinions of me mattered less than my opinion of myself. I slept better. I ate with more appetite. I smiled more genuinely. That evening, Leela texted me. "They're telling people you're not yourself." I texted back, "That's what people say when they can't control you anymore." She responded with a string of laughing, crying emojis and a heart. Here's something I learned at 77 that I wish I'd known at 37. The people who benefit most from your lack of boundaries will be the loudest critics when you finally establish them. On Friday, a new player entered the drama. Caleb Hart, Sabrina's brother, appeared at my door with a box of expensive pastries from a bakery in Green Hills. Caleb was 45, a real estate broker with a 1,000-watt smile and a handshake that lingered just a beat too long. He had the kind of charm that worked on people who confuse confidence with competence. "Eleanor," he said, stepping into my house without being invited, "I'm here to help solve this little family misunderstanding." I accepted the pastries, but didn't offer him coffee. "There's no misunderstanding, Caleb." "Look, I get it," he said, settling onto my sofa like he belonged there. "Money can be stressful. If you're worried about your financial security, I can help. I've got a list of buyers looking for exactly this kind of property. We could get you top dollar, move you into something more manageable, and smooth things over with the family. Win-win." "I'm not selling my house," I said calmly, "and I don't need any smoothing." His smile flickered, yet held. "The thing is, Eleanor, people are starting to talk. They're saying you've made some rash decisions. Maybe you're not thinking clearly." I walked to my front door and opened it. "Let them talk, Caleb. Truth doesn't need to shout to be heard." He stood slowly, his smile finally fading. "You might want to reconsider. Family relationships are fragile things." "Yes," I agreed, "which is why I'm finally treating mine with the respect they deserve." After he left, I called Harold Pierce and told him about the visit. He made notes and advised me to document any future contact attempts. The family was testing boundaries, trying to find weak spots in my resolve. They wouldn't find any. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you grateful to be alive. I was tending my chrysanthemums when Leela called.
"Grandmother, they're having a family meeting at the house today about you." "Are you going?" "Mom says I have to, but I wanted you to know." I could picture it. Sabrina orchestrating the gathering like one of her high-end events, carefully positioning allies and managing the narrative. Marcus standing beside her, still not understanding how we'd reached this point. Various family members recruited to apply pressure, to make me see reason. "Tell them I said hello," I told Leela. "Aren't you worried about what they'll decide?" "Sweetheart," I said, deadheading a particularly vibrant yellow bloom, "you can't lose something you never actually had. And you can't be excluded from a relationship you were already being taken for granted in." That afternoon, Sabrina called. Her voice was different. Less honey, more steel. "We're having a family discussion about this situation. I think you should be here." "I think I shouldn't," I replied. "Eleanor, this affects everyone. We need to clear the air." "The air is perfectly clear from where I'm sitting." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her carefully controlled facade had cracked slightly. "Fine, be stubborn, but understand that actions have consequences." "Yes," I agreed, "they certainly do." Now, here's where the story takes a turn that nobody, including me, saw coming. Monday morning, I received a certified letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a notice that Marcus and Sabrina were disputing the security deed Harold Pierce had filed 6 years ago.
They claimed I had no legal right to any interest in their property and were demanding that I cease all harassment and financial manipulation. I sat at my kitchen table reading the legal language, and I started to laugh. Not a bitter laugh, not a sad laugh, a genuinely amused laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here's what they didn't understand. Harold Pierce wasn't just any attorney. He was one of the most respected elder law attorneys in Tennessee. Every document had been filed correctly, every I dotted, every T crossed. The security deed was ironclad. But more than that, they'd just made a tactical error that would cost them everything. I called Harold immediately. "They're challenging the deed," I told him. "On what grounds?" I read him the letter. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor," he said finally, "do you remember what the original agreement stated about disputes?" I thought back to that day 6 years ago when I'd written the check for their down payment. Harold had insisted on protective language, and I'd agreed to humor him. "If they dispute the validity of the deed, the full amount becomes immediately due and payable." Harold finished, with interest and legal fees. The laughter bubbled up again. $68,000 plus 6 years of compound interest plus attorney fees. They just accelerated their own financial reckoning. "What do you want me to do?" Harold asked. "File a response. Demand immediate payment." And Harold, yes, let's make this as public as required by law. No sealed filings, no confidential proceedings. They want to make this about my mental capacity. Let's let everyone see exactly how capable I am. That afternoon, I drove to Belmead. Not to their house. I wasn't welcome there anymore, apparently. But to the coffee shop where I knew Sabrina held her weekly business meetings. She was there, sitting in the corner with her laptop and a skinny latte, looking like the successful businesswoman she pretended to be on my dime. I bought myself a regular coffee, black, no sugar, and walked to her table.
May I sit down? She gestured to the chair across from her with barely concealed irritation. If you're here to apologize, I'm not. I placed a copy of Harold's response on the table beside her laptop. She picked up the papers and read. I watched her face change as she processed the implications. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the documents down. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. "We can't possibly—" "Pay back what you borrowed?" I finished. "Most people can't. That's why most people don't borrow money they can't afford to repay. But we put everything into the house renovations, the business expansion. With my money," I pointed out. "Money you're now claiming I had no right to secure." She stared at me across the small cafe table, and for the first time in 4 years, I saw her without the mask of superiority and manipulation. She looked exactly like what she was, a middle-aged woman who had overextended herself financially and was facing the consequences. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want what I've always wanted: respect, basic human decency, recognition that I'm not your personal bank account. And if we give you that—" I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "Sabrina, you can't negotiate respect after years of contempt. You can't bargain for decency after humiliating someone in front of their family. You can earn those things back, but you can't purchase them." I stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing. When you inevitably call Marcus to discuss this, you might want to mention that challenging the deed was your lawyer's idea, because right now, he probably thinks this financial crisis fell from the sky." Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my husband died: complete control over my own life. The rest of the week passed in a series of increasingly desperate phone calls that I didn't answer and increasingly pleading voicemails that I deleted without listening to. But Friday brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus arrived alone, without Sabrina's coaching or legal threats. He knocked softly on my door and waited for me to answer instead of letting himself in. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" I looked at my son, my 52-year-old son who was finally asking permission instead of assuming access, and stepped aside to let him in. He sat at my kitchen table and put his head in his hands. I didn't know about the legal challenge until after they filed it. Sabrina said it was just a formality, a way to clear up old paperwork. And now our attorney says we owe you $96,000 immediately, or you can force the sale of our house. I poured myself coffee and offered him some. He accepted it gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm mug like it was an anchor. I keep thinking about when I was 12. Remember when I broke Mrs. Patterson's window with my baseball? I remembered. He hit a line drive that shattered her front window, then tried to sneak home without telling anyone. You made me go back and confess. You made me apologize and offer to work off the cost of repairs. I was so angry at you. You thought I was being mean. I thought I was being unfair. All my friends' parents would have just paid for it quietly. He looked up at me with eyes that suddenly seemed much older. But you said something I didn't understand then. What did I say? You said that protecting me from consequences wasn't the same as protecting me. That learning to face what I'd done was more important than avoiding embarrassment. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years settling between us. "I think I've been 12 years old for a very long time," he said finally. "Most people are,
And some part of themselves, I can't promise will change overnight. And I can't speak for Sabrina, but I don't want our story to end like this. I looked at my son across the kitchen table where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where I'd listened to his teenage problems and young adult dreams. Our story doesn't end, Marcus. It just gets new terms. What kind of terms? Respect or distance? Your choice. He nodded slowly. I'll try. Trying is a start, I said. That weekend, Leela came to visit. She brought apple turnovers from a bakery on 12th South and helped me plant bulbs for next spring's garden. I'm proud of you, grandmother, she said as we worked the soil around my maple tree. For what? For not disappearing. I stopped digging and looked at her. What do you mean? I've watched what's been happening for years. How you got smaller every time they needed something bigger. How you apologized for things that weren't your fault. How you acted grateful for being tolerated in your own family. She patted soil around a tulip bulb with careful precision. I was afraid you'd disappear completely. That night, after Leela left, I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of approaching winter, but I felt warm from the inside out. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived from a mortgage company. Inside was a cashier's check for $96,000 and a letter stating that the security deed had been satisfied through refinancing. I deposited the check and called Harold to close the matter officially. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Solvent," I replied, and we both laughed. But the real change wasn't financial. It was something deeper, something that money couldn't measure. Marcus started calling regularly, not when he needed something, just to talk, to tell me about his day, to ask about mine, to slowly rebuild the relationship we'd lost somewhere in the maze of financial dependence. Sabrina remained distant but civil. She stopped making cutting remarks, stopped treating me like hired help at family gatherings. I suspected Marcus had set some boundaries of his own. And Leela? She started coming over every Sunday for dinner. Real dinner, cooked with care and eaten without hurry. She'd tell me about her classes at Vanderbilt, her part-time job at the bookstore, her dreams for the future that were entirely her own. "You know what I learned from watching all this?" she said one Sunday as we cleaned dishes together. "What's that?" "That love without boundaries isn't really love. It's just enabling wrapped in guilt." At 19, she understood something it had taken me 77 years to learn. But here's the thing about late-learned lessons. They may come after years of getting it wrong, but they still count. They still have the power to change everything that comes after. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself, whether you're the one being taken for granted or the one doing the taking, let me tell you something. It's never too late to reset the terms of your relationships. It's never too late to say no to being treated poorly. It's never too late to demand the respect you've been freely giving to others. It's never too late to stop funding other people's lives at the expense of your own dignity. Now, I know some of you are thinking this sounds harsh. Some of you believe that family should help family unconditionally, that love means never keeping score, that setting boundaries is selfish. Here's what I want to challenge you to consider. Unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unconditional disrespect. Helping family doesn't mean becoming their permanent financial solution. Not keeping score doesn't mean pretending the game isn't rigged against you. And setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's self-preservation disguised as a gift to everyone involved. Because here's what really happened when I finally said enough. I didn't just save my bank account. I saved my relationships.
Marcus had to learn to be independent, and that independence made him a better man, a better husband, a better father. Removing the financial safety net forced him to develop emotional and practical muscles he'd never needed before. Leela learned that love looks like respect, not rescue. She learned that the strongest people aren't those who never fall down, but those who insist on getting back up on their own. And I learned that the ground doesn't disappear when you stop letting people walk on you. It gets firmer, more solid, more capable of supporting the life you actually want to live. The holidays came and went. Christmas was smaller that year, but warmer. We gathered at my cottage instead of their grand house. Leela helped me cook. Marcus brought wine and actually helped with dishes. Even Sabrina seemed to be thriving in her business now that she was operating within her actual means instead of mine.
And me, I was learning to be 77 without apology. I joined a book club. I took a watercolor class. I volunteered at the animal shelter, walking dogs who wagged their tails just because I showed up, no strings attached. I was learning to spend my money on experiences instead of obligations, on joy instead of guilt, on myself instead of everyone else's emergencies. One evening in late spring, I was deadheading my roses when Marcus stopped by unexpectedly. "I have something for you," he said, holding out an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for teaching me that love isn't supposed to hurt." Below it was a check for $5,000. "Marcus, I don't need—" "It's not about what you need," he said quietly. "It's about what I need. I need to practice being the kind of man who pays his own way and contributes instead of just consuming." I looked at the check, then at my son. "This is a lot of money." "It's a start," he said, "toward paying back what we should have been paying all along." "And Sabrina agreed to this?" He smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. "Sabrina's learning too. Turns out when you stop enabling someone's worst impulses, they sometimes discover better ones." That night, I called Harold Pierce and asked him to set up a scholarship fund, the Eleanor Whitfield Fund for first-generation college students. The $5,000 would be the start, but I planned to add to it regularly. If I was going to spend my money on someone's future, it would be for kids who actually needed it, not adults who had simply gotten comfortable avoiding responsibility. Summer brought longer days and deeper satisfactions. My garden flourished. My relationships improved. My bank account remained healthy because I was no longer hemorrhaging money to subsidize other people's lifestyle choices. But the real change was internal. I looked in the mirror each morning and saw someone I respected. Someone who had finally learned the difference between being kind and being taken advantage of. Someone who understood that saying no to disrespect was actually the most loving thing she could do for everyone involved. Because here's the final truth I want to leave you with. When you stop rescuing people from their own choices, you give them the opportunity to rescue themselves. When you stop being their safety net, they learn to find their own balance. When you stop funding their dreams, they learn to make their own way. And when you stop accepting less than you deserve, everyone around you learns to offer more. That dinner conversation, "You'll eat what the dog doesn't finish," was the best thing Sabrina ever said to me. Not because it was kind, but because it was finally honest about how she saw me. And honesty, even cruel honesty,
gave me something to work with. It gave me clarity. It gave me motivation. It gave me permission to stop pretending that being mistreated was the same as being loved. So to everyone watching this, let me ask you, what are you eating that you should be feeding to the dog? What relationships are you accepting scraps from when you deserve the full meal? What boundaries have you been afraid to set because you think love means never saying no? What would change in your life if you decided that being liked was less important than being respected? What would happen if you stopped funding other people's comfort at the expense of your own dignity? These aren't easy questions. The answers might be uncomfortable. The changes might be difficult. But here's what I learned at 77 that I wish I'd known decades earlier. The temporary discomfort of setting boundaries is nothing compared to the permanent damage of having none. The short-term conflict of saying no is nothing compared to the long-term resentment of always saying yes. The immediate criticism you'll face for changing the rules is nothing compared to the lasting peace you'll find when you finally start playing a game you can actually win.
If you're ready to stop eating scraps and start demanding your place at the table, not as a charity case or a convenient ATM, but as a human being worthy of basic respect, then comment below and tell me one boundary you're ready to set. Tell me one relationship you're ready to reset. Tell me one way you're going to stop funding other people's dreams while your own gather dust. Because transformation doesn't require a perfect plan or ideal circumstances. It just requires a moment when you decide that enough is enough. My moment came at a dinner table in Belmead when my daughter-in-law suggested I eat what the dog didn't finish. What will your moment be? And more importantly, when it comes, will you be ready to pick up that metaphorical steak, feed it to the dog, and announce that you're finally ready to see what dignity tastes like? The ground is steady when you finally claim it as your own. 6 months after that dinner, I received an invitation that surprised me. Sabrina was hosting a charity event for her business, a fundraiser for literacy programs in local schools. At the bottom of the elegant invitation, she'd written in her own handwriting, "Eleanor, I hope you'll consider attending. Your support would mean everything. Sabrina." I stared at that note for a long time. The old me would have immediately written a check and shown up early to help set up chairs. The new me did something different. I called her directly. "Sabrina, I got your invitation." "Oh, good. I wasn't sure if—" "I'll attend," I said, "but I won't be writing a check. If you want my financial support, you'll need to present a proper business proposal with budgets, timelines, and accountability measures. I'm happy to consider it as an investment opportunity, but my days of blank check charity are over." There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. "You know what, Eleanor? That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." The event was beautiful. Sabrina had used her own money she'd earned through her actual business skills rather than my subsidies, to create something meaningful. The silent auction raised $12,000 for literacy programs. Local teachers spoke about the impact. Children read poems they'd written. I watched Sabrina work the room with genuine passion instead of performative charm, and I realized something. Cutting off her access to easy money had forced her to develop real skills. She was actually good at this when she had to be. After the event, she approached me near the coat check. Sabrina, I owe you an apology, not just for that night at dinner, but for years of taking advantage of your generosity. What changed your mind? I asked. Having to do things myself, she said simply. When you stopped funding our lifestyle, I had to figure out what I was actually capable of. Turns out it was more than I thought. We stood there for a moment, two women who had finally learned to see each other clearly. I'd like to submit that business proposal for the literacy program expansion, as partners, not as whatever we were before. I'd like to see it, I replied. As I drove home that night, I thought about the unexpected gift hidden in that terrible dinner conversation. By forcing me to confront the worst version of our relationship, Sabrina had accidentally created space for the best version to emerge. Sometimes the cruelest truths lead to the kindest outcomes. The following Christmas was different again. We gathered at Lila's apartment near Vanderbilt. She'd insisted on hosting, wanted to practice being the kind of adult who contributed instead of just consumed. She cooked most of the meal herself, though I brought my famous apple pie, and Marcus contributed wine he'd researched and saved for. Sabrina arrived with a wrapped box that she handed to me with nervous energy. "It's not expensive," she said quickly. "I made it myself." Inside was a photo album she'd put together by hand. Pictures of our family through the years, but arranged chronologically to tell the story of how our relationships had evolved. The early pictures showed forced smiles and obvious tension. The recent ones captured genuine moments of connection and laughter. On the last page, she'd written, "Thank you for loving us enough to stop enabling us. Thank you for showing us what healthy boundaries look like. Thank you for proving that real love sometimes means saying no." I looked up to find the whole family watching me. Marcus was trying not to cry. Lila was beaming with pride. Even Sabrina looked vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "This is the best gift I've ever received," I said. And I meant it. Because it represented something money couldn't buy. Genuine transformation. Not just mine, but theirs too. That night, as I sat in my own living room with my coffee and my memories, I realized that the woman who had walked into that Belmead dining room 18 months ago was gone. She'd been replaced by someone stronger, clearer, more at peace with her own worth. The phone rang. It was Dot, my oldest friend. "How was Christmas?" she asked. "Perfect," I said. Not because nothing went wrong, but because when things did go wrong, we handled them like adults who respect each other. "That's the Eleanor I remember from 40 years ago," Dot said. Strong, clear, unafraid to stand up for herself. I wondered where she'd gone. "She went into hiding," I admitted, "behind a checkbook and a need to be needed. But it turns out she was just waiting for permission to come back out." "And who gave her that permission?" I thought about it. About that moment at the dinner table when I'd finally reached my breaking point. About the choice to feed the dog that expensive steak instead of accepting scraps. "I did," I said finally. "I gave myself permission to stop apologizing for taking up space in my own life." After we hung up, I pulled out my journal and wrote, "Day 547 without apology. Still learning that self-respect is not selfish. Still discovering that boundaries are not barriers, they're bridges to better relationships. Still amazed that saying no to disrespect
created space for genuine love to grow. Today, as I finish telling you this story, I'm 78 years old. My bank account is healthy because I spend money on things that matter to me rather than funding other people's avoidance of responsibility. My relationships are stronger because they're based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Marcus calls every week now, not when he needs something, but when he wants to connect. He and Sabrina refinanced their house on their own merit, built their own emergency fund, learned to live within their actual means. Their marriage improved when they stopped using my money as a bandage for their financial incompatibility. Lila's thriving in college, partly because she knows her education is secure. The trust I set up ensures she'll graduate debt-free, but mostly because she's learned to value independence over comfort, growth over gifts. And Sabrina, she's built a successful business helping other people plan events. Real success, earned through skill and effort, rather than subsidized by someone else's sacrifice. She's never again suggested I eat what the dog doesn't finish, but more importantly, she's never again treated me like I should be grateful for the privilege of being tolerated. The Eleanor Whitfield Scholarship Fund has grown to over $50,000 and helped 12 first-generation college students pursue their dreams. Every semester, I receive letters from young people whose potential was unlocked, not by rescue, but by opportunity. I still live in my cottage in Franklin. I still tend my garden and volunteer at the library. But now I also travel. Real trips. To places I've always wanted to see, funded by money I would have previously spent on other people's emergencies. I've learned to paint watercolors, terrible ones that make me laugh. I've joined a hiking group for seniors, discovered that my 78-year-old legs are stronger than I thought. I've even started dating. Nothing serious, just the pleasure of dinner conversation with a gentleman who thinks my independence is attractive rather than threatening. The most important thing I've learned is that it's never too late to start over, never too late to redefine the terms of your relationships, never too late to demand better than scraps. The questions I asked you earlier weren't rhetorical. They were invitations. Invitations to examine your own life, your own relationships, your own boundaries. Are you funding someone else's dreams while your own gather dust? Are you accepting less than you deserve because you're afraid of being alone? Are you confusing being needed with being loved? Are you so busy trying to be nice that you've forgotten how to be respected? If any of these questions make you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is often the first sign that change is necessary.
The woman who sat at that dinner table 18 months ago thought that being mistreated was the price of being loved. She was wrong. Being mistreated is the price of not loving yourself enough to demand better. The woman sitting here today knows that real love, whether from family, friends, or romantic partners, doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. Real love doesn't ask you to eat scraps while others feast. Real love doesn't demand that you fund other people's choices while sacrificing your own dreams. Real love doesn't require you to apologize for taking up space in your own life. If the people in your life can't love you while you maintain your dignity, then what they're offering isn't love. It's something else entirely. Convenience, maybe, or control or simple habit, but not love. Love wants you to thrive. Love celebrates your success. Love respects your boundaries. Love appreciates your gifts without taking them for granted. Love never, ever suggests you should eat what the dog doesn't finish. So here's my final challenge to you. Look at your life honestly. Look at your relationships with clear eyes. Look at your bank account, your calendar, your energy levels. Where are you giving more than you're receiving? Where are you being taken for granted? Where are you funding other people's comfort at the expense of your own dignity? And then ask yourself the most important question of all. What would happen if you stopped? What would happen if you said no to the next unreasonable request? What would happen if you demanded respect instead of accepting tolerance? What would happen if you started treating yourself with the same kindness you've been showing everyone else? The answer might surprise you. It might scare you. It will definitely change you. But here's what I know for certain. The ground doesn't disappear when you stop letting people walk on you. It gets firmer, more solid, more capable of supporting the life you actually want to live. In that life, the one where you're respected instead of used, valued instead of taken for granted, loved instead of tolerated, is waiting for you to claim it. All you have to do is stop eating scraps and start demanding your seat at the table. The dog will manage just fine with his regular kibble. And you'll finally discover what you've been hungry for all along. Not food, not money, not even love exactly. Dignity, self-respect, the radical satisfaction of being seen, valued, and treated as the complete human being you've always been. So what are you waiting for? Your moment of clarity might not come at a dinner table in Belmead. It might not involve a daughter-in-law and an expensive steak, but it will come. And when it does, I hope you'll remember this story. I hope you'll remember that a 77-year-old retired principal found the courage to change everything simply by refusing to accept less than she deserved. If I can do it at my age after decades of getting it wrong, then anyone can. The only question left is, will you? Comment below and let me know what boundary you're ready to set, what relationship you're ready to reset, what part of your life you're ready to reclaim. Because your story doesn't end with how other people have treated you. It begins with how you decide to treat yourself. And that beginning, it can start right now. The steak is yours for the taking. The dog has plenty of his own food. It's time to stop settling for scraps and start claiming the feast you've been preparing for everyone else. Your dignity is waiting. Go get it.